A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, an underrated book? No. But Betty Smith? Hello Booktube, it's Marilyn Maya, the baby boomer booktuber. About a month ago, I did a series, or I started a series of underrated authors. And I talked about Josephine Tey, who was a contemporary of Agatha Christie. Well, I decided to continue with this series with another great author who's underappreciated, and that's Betty White. Betty White. I'm thinking of Betty White, but it's Betty Smith. And yeah, Betty White, I loved her. So Betty Smith wrote A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and A Tree Grows in Brooklyn is one of the canons of American literature. It's always on a top 300. It's like a top 50 book that people always put in. And A Tree Grows in Brooklyn is very personal to me, which I will tell you about later on. And it's about Francie Nolan and her brother, who grow up in 1912 in Brooklyn in a blue-collar neighborhood and deal with different things, different aspects. I read this is the 25th anniversary of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and the Anna Quindlen, who I'm very quickly becoming a fan of, wrote the introduction. And she said something very interesting. We think of this either as a social novel or a coming-of-age novel. But what is it about? That's what she says. And so, is it a story about poverty? Is it a story of alcoholic fathers, a young girl trying to make it in the life? But what she says, and I'm just paraphrasing here, is that summarizing the book by its plot points is underrated, because this is more than any trope can. It is about life. And so what's the book about, people say? And you can say all of these things, but what it's really about is the human condition, how we get along in life, how a young girl brought up, the end of the last century, and in the beginning of the 20th century, navigates life in poverty, basically. And I'm going to get back to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn at the end of my video, with a little personal aspect. This book has meant a lot to me. In almost 500 pages, but it just goes by so fast, and you get so immersed in the story. And this book was written in 1943, and I read an article that said about a Marine who read the book when he was in World War II and was very touched by it, probably because it talked about his neighborhood and what he missed about growing up in this area of Brooklyn. Anyway, this video is not only about A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. It's about the wonderful Betty Smith. And she wrote other books that people know nothing about. And I want to introduce you to some of those books. From least favorite, which I can't say is least favorite, to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is my favorite book. But I want to just tell you something about Betty Smith. She admitted that all her books were autobiographical, either about her life or about people that she knew in Brooklyn, my part of Brooklyn. So, of course, it was way before I was born, and the neighborhood when through a lot of changes since then. But let's start with the book after A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, immediately after, and it's my least favorite book. Not saying that it's not good. And it's called Maggie Now. And over here, this is a very old copy that I bought secondhand. And I don't know if you can see right here, but that's the Williamsburg Bridge. And the Williamsburg Bridge was a very important part of my life because I walked across it. Me and my father drove across it, and I was very happy to see it in this old vintage copy. And the houses, the tenements where Francie lived. But this is Maggie. So what is Maggie Now about? So she weaves a riveting modern myth out of the experiences of her own life, like I said. So in Brooklyn's unforgiving jungle, even then, Maggie Moore is torn between answering her own needs and catering to the desirous men who dominate her life. So basically, it's also a feminist book, if you look at it that way. Confronted by her quarrelsome Irish immigrant father, the feckless lover who may become her husband, and others, Maggie must learn to navigate a cycle of loss, separation, and hope as she forges her way. She forges her own path toward happiness. So I'm not going to read you all of the good things that it says about it, but this is something about the book itself. She grew up healthy, happy, and loving. She was full of mischief and cheerfully disobedient. The day long throughout the house it was, "Maggie, now give me those scissors before you stab yourself. Maggie, now mind your father when he speaks to you. Maggie Now." And so she became known as Maggie Now. So I thought that was maybe something that will make you want to pick up Maggie Now. I couldn't get as attached to Maggie as with the other books I read, but it was still enjoyable. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is even an older book in my library, and it's Tomorrow Will Be Better. I recommend this book so highly. It tells the story of Margie, another kind of Francie, or another kind of Betty Smith. Shy but optimistic young woman just out of school who lives with her parents and witnesses how a lifetime of hard work, poverty, and pain has worn them down. Her mother's resentment toward being a housewife and her father's inability to express his emotions result in a tense home life where Margie has no voice. Unable to speak up against her overbearing mother, Margie takes refuge in her dreams of a better life. Her goals are simple: to find a husband, have children, and live in a nice home, which is what most women wanted because that was all that mostly was afforded to them in this time, which is like the 1920s. And this is sort of my mother's time, so it was very interesting to me to see how women were treated in that time in that neighborhood. So she wants a home where her children will never know the terror of want or need to hide from quarreling parents. This is a theme in all of Betty Smith's novels, is unhappy family life, because she had one. When she meets Frankie Malone, she thinks her dreams might be fulfilled, but a devastating loss rattles her to the core and challenges her lifelong optimism. As she struggles to come to terms with the unexpected path her life has taken, Margie must decide whether to accept things as they are or move firmly into the direction that she wants to go. Rich with the flavor of its Brooklyn background and filled with the joys and heartbreak of family life, it's told with simplicity, tenderness, and warm-hearted humor that only Betty Smith could write. I really enjoyed the parts where she was working in an office, and since my mother worked in an office or maybe a little later than this time period, but it had a lot of the things that my mother told me about being an office worker, about being a girl who was really lowest on the totem pole. So I really, really liked this almost as much as I liked A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. This is Betty Smith's life, and I felt it. The last book, and it's almost my favorite, is Joy in the Morning by Betty Smith, of course. And it's Brooklyn, of course, again, 1927, so we're a little bit further out from 1912, where A Tree Grows in Brooklyn starts. And Carl Brown and Annie McGarry meet and fall in love. Though only 18, Annie travels alone to the Midwestern University where Carl is studying law to marry him. Little did she know how difficult their first year of marriage would be, in a faraway place with little money and few friends. But Carl and Annie come to realize that the struggles and uncertainty of poverty and hardship can be overcome by the strength of a loving, loyal relationship. An unsentimental yet uplifting story, Joy in the Morning is a timeless and radiant novel of marriage and young love. And she also comes, and what's her name? Annie McGarry, also comes from an unhappy family life, and she sort of almost runs away. Her mother didn't want her to get married. She has a very, in almost every book. I'm not sure if A Tree Grows in Brooklyn has this too. The title of the book comes from the Bible. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Psalms 30.5. I read this book when I was a young married woman of her age, and I just loved it. It showed how Betty Smith, undereducated, so wanted to have an education. And I'm not going to spoil the book for you, but she does take some steps in that, just as Betty Smith did. Okay, so that I really love this. This is very close to my heart because I read it when I was young, and I just felt it as a person who reads a coming-of-age novel when they're exactly the same age might feel about a book. All right, now we're going to go back to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. So it says here, the New Yorker says it's one of the greatest American novels. And it is. It has everything that you would want to know about in the greatest novel that maybe, I think it's one of my top 10 novels that I've ever read. But I have a special personal attachment to it. You see, I was born in the same place where this book takes place. In fact, the same names of the streets were names of the streets where that I grew up in. And I wrote something that was supposed to be in my memoir that, you know what they say, you have to kill your darlings. Well, this was a darling I had to kill, but it relates to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, so please humor me, it's very short. On June 24th, 2003, the Williamsburg Houses was designated a New York City landmark, comparable to the Chrysler Building and Grand Central Station. When reporters visited and interviewed the tenants, they said they had no idea they lived in a special place. I always knew. In 1938, 12 slum blocks depicted in the novel A Tree Grows in Brooklyn were razed by the city of New York. The displaced tenants moved from Coldwater Flats to the new development where hot water, steam heat, and free electricity would be provided for affordable rent. The project's overseer was an architect who worked on the Empire State Building, and the head designer, William LeCaze, or Lescaz, was a Swiss designer passionate about Art Deco style and determined to bring it to the States. He succeeded with the 4 acres at his disposal and created 10 4-story buildings decorated with blue panels, its doorways covered with aluminum awnings. This design, so different from the multi-story red brick housing projects set back from skimpy patches of lawn, it garnered much attention from the press. In 1939, the architectural journal Pencil Points author and architect Talbot F. Hamlin said of the Williamsburg houses, "It offers more of the amenities of good housing that many Park Avenue apartments lack in air, light, in green and growing, in humanity and decency." We just called it the projects. Now, this meant a lot to me. I lived in a tenement, not in Williamsburg, well, in Williamsburg, but in the south side of Williamsburg near the bridge with my mother and father until I was 4 years old, and they knocked down the tenement for to build the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, which still exists. And when I saw the projects, it was, especially at that time, there was fountains, there was grass, there were squirrels, there were birds. I mean, you felt like you were in the country, right in the middle of the city. And this is where I grew up. And now that I look back at it, the architecture was the Art Deco was stunning. And despite my childhood being chaotic, I think being brought up in such an environment, unlike Francie, who had to really suffer in those cold water flats, I think it helped me. It helped me have a better future, think that I deserved a better future. So this is sort of the end of my video, but I wanted to thank everyone who watches. I have a few new subscribers, so welcome. I appreciate all of you. I hope that you read one of Betty Smith's books, because she deserves more attention than just for A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, her masterpiece. And yes, it is a masterpiece, but every one of her books tells you something about her life. And since she wrote a masterpiece, don't we want to know about her life? I did, and so I bought every book she wrote. So I hope I've convinced you to read some of her other books. And if you're new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell and like and comment. I answer all comments. Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading says that I write long comments. Well, I'm a writer, so I enjoy writing comments. I enjoy communicating with the community. So until we meet, I hope everyone is well and fine and having a wonderful weekend. It's Sunday here. So until we meet again, aloha.